Good morning. We are so happy that you are with us again for worship this morning. We are going to begin with a word of prayer. What we're going to do this morning is a little different than what we've done before. What will happen is that after I'm done speaking, you are going to see the prayer on your screen, accompanied by pictures. The pictures that I've included, most of them I took during this week for our prayer time, but others were included as well from other people. You will see on each screen a picture with words along with it. And so if you will say the words on each screen, that will be our prayer today. And it will also include a screen that will show specific people that we're praying with and for today. So I hope you'll find this meaningful and that you will say the prayer aloud at home by yourself or with others that you are with. So let us pray together.
Genesis 27, verses 38 through 45. Esau said to his father, "Have you only one blessing, father? Bless me also, father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then his father Isaac answered him, "See, away from the fatness of the earth shall your home be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of her elder son Esau were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away. Until your brother's anger against you turns away, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?"
Several years ago, when I was completing my degree in mental health counseling, my favorite professor said to me early on in my coursework that I would never fully understand people until I had taken my first full family therapy course. And boy, was she right. And boy, could Jacob and Esau's family have used a little bit of good family therapy. For last week, we heard the astonishing story of how Jacob stole by deceiving his father's blessing that rightfully should have gone to his brother Esau. Today, we fast forward 20 years, and we find Jacob now finishing his time working with his uncle Laban. At this point, I want to encourage you to take some time to read that full story in the book of Genesis so that you can learn the full context of this story and his time during this period with his uncle Laban. But what I think you need to know this morning are a couple of things. First is that Jacob appeared to thrive in many ways during his time with Laban. For example, he grew wealthier, he got married, he started a family, and he appeared in many ways to be growing up. Yet, Jacob was still the guy who thought he was the smartest person in the room. And he also was still the guy who was willing to manipulate people for his own personal gain. Because of that, eventually his time with Laban didn't end so well. In fact, he left, he said, urged by God, with no warning, to head home. Home meaning to go back to where Esau was, his brother, who he had wronged, and who the last time he had heard about him was saying that he would kill Jacob if he ever saw him again. Last week I ended the message by posing the question, did Jacob and Esau ever find a path back to each other, a path of reconciliation? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's complicated. So Jacob headed back home knowing that he had wronged his brother, terrified that his brother would kill him when he saw him. So even though Jacob felt called by God to return home, and even though he was still in possession of his father's blessing, and even though now he was surrounded by his own family and his own friends and his own followers, his own people, his own entourage, he was afraid. He even tries to manipulate God a bit. That's how afraid he was. We learn in Genesis 32:9 that he asked God to save him from Esau, kind of reminding God that, hey, it's your idea that I go back, so you need to make sure that Esau doesn't kill me as part of returning. More than that, he picked out lavish gifts to send ahead to his brother, well ahead to his brother, to hedge his bets a bit. Tell him, he instructs his men, to say, make sure to say that they are from your servant, Jacob. Thinking, the scripture says, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on. Later, when I see him, perhaps because of these great gifts I have given him, he will receive me. Yet he stays a safe distance behind to see what happens first. Sounds a little bit like the old Jacob, right? Reminds me of the Mumford and Sons lyrics. They sang, the fear of what's to come has been crippling me. For Jacob, the fear of what's to come was crippling him. It was making it very hard for him to get on with his life and to know what to do with his life. So clearly God's Spirit had more work to do on Jacob's spirit before he could see his brother. And when God's Spirit has work to do, work gets done. And in this case, it was done in the form of a very mysterious spiritual figure, not super well defined, clearly some kind of representative of God, of the divine, that engaged in a physical struggle with Jacob, perhaps in a dreamlike state, the entire night before he was to see his brother Esau the next day. It all starts in Genesis chapter 32, verse 24. I encourage you to read it. Right now, what I want you to know is there are three things, as I see it, that were key that happened in that struggle. One was that Jacob couldn't manipulate his way out of it because this was a physical as well as mental struggle. Two, Jacob learned to stand his ground on his own. He didn't win the struggle, but he wasn't defeated by it either. And third, Jacob was changed by this encounter, fundamentally changed spiritually. He was marked by it. Physical marking, spiritual marking. Physically, he walked away from it with a limp that stayed with him. But he also walked away with it with a new purpose in life, a new mission. And he walked away from it with a new name. He would now be called Israel. So, a lot was going on in the life of Jacob in these 20 years, right up until when he met Esau again. What about Esau? Well, we don't know as much about Esau. In fact, we know very little about what he was actually doing in this time. What we do know is he made a lot of money. He became wealthy. He was successful. But while we don't know the details, we know a whole lot by his actions, what was going on with him. Whatever he was doing and whatever God was doing with him was changing his life too and preparing him for reconciliation with his brother. The hot-headed, impulsive Esau had changed, so that when he sees the limping Jacob in the distance coming his way, he doesn't turn around. He doesn't walk towards him. He runs towards his brother. And he hugs him and he kisses him and they weep together in an astonishing, amazing, unexpected, unpredictable moment of true reconciliation between two brothers who had been at each other's throats. It has to be that way because true reconciliation is never a one-way street. It can't be forced. It can't be manipulated into happening. Both parties have to do the work and have to want it to happen for it to happen. And in their own way, Jacob and Esau, with God's Spirit mixed in, did. Now, there are lots of things that are different about Jacob and Esau's world and the world we live in now. But here's something that is the same, I think. That is that broken relationships are more common than truly reconciled, truly restored relationships. So that's part of the power of this story, is it points us to a possibility for us in our lives, perhaps, God willing. So I want to talk for just a moment about what we can learn from the reconciliation of Jacob and Esau. And I'm going to sprinkle into these remarks some of what I've learned as a pastor, some of what I've learned as a counselor, some of what I've learned in my own life as somebody who struggles, as all people do, with how to create and maintain healthy relationships with other people, including in our families. I want to give you, of course, the usual caveat about what I say. Take whatever helps, toss what doesn't. And I'm going to put this into 6, what I hope will be pretty brief points for you. The first one is that if you are in a relationship that's struggling, get help. It's hard to fix struggling relationships for anybody. Don't try to do it all by yourself. Jacob and Esau didn't, so we shouldn't either. Talk to a trusted friend, a pastor, a mental health counselor, someone who can give you perspective, trusted advice, so that you're seeing what's really going on and what possibilities might really exist to reconcile. Number 2, time helps. No doubt that a Jacob and an Esau reconciliation before the time it was ready to happen, which was at least a good 20 years, would probably have not ended very well and might have ended with physical and even deadly violence. So taking a break and getting some space is not always a bad thing, especially, number 3, if both parties use that time to work on themselves, like Jacob and Esau did. It's just true that nothing changes if nothing changes. So if we just stay on the path we're on and that path is not working with another person for whatever reason, then that path is probably not going to work until both parties decide to create a new path, like Jacob and Esau did. But it took them a long time. 4, open your heart spiritually. God can't work with us if we're determined to stay stuck. I always think about that phrasing that's in Exodus about hardness of heart of the Pharaoh. If our hearts are hardened and there's no possibility for us to rethink anything that we believe or have experienced or have decided in our lives, then it is highly unlikely that any kind of change will happen with us. So if we're stuck in our ways and clinging to them and not willing to get help and not willing to think of different perspectives and different possibilities, then we are ruling out any possibility, barring a pure miracle, that God can work with us to create something new and better in our lives. It is clear that Jacob and Esau loved each other, at least on some level, all of those years apart, enough for there to be enough open-heartedness for the Spirit of God to get in there and start to change the fullness of each of their hearts towards each other. 5, I'll say this again because it's just so important to say reconciliation is not a one-way street. Reconciliation is built on principles of love and justice and peace and all of those values that Jesus demonstrated. If you are doing all of the work to reconcile a relationship, then that's not a true reconciliation process. And if you don't feel safe or you don't feel valued in that process, then that's not a true reconciliation process. And that's why that number 1 of getting help and perspective and support and counsel can be so important to help you find the right path for yourself, so that what you do decide is one that keeps you healthy and safe and well, along with the person you're hoping to reconcile with. And number 6, reconciliation is a struggle. Okay, Jacob found that out. It's not for the faint of heart. It's usually not something that can be resolved with simple solutions. So just know that. If you're struggling with a relationship, that's okay. The question is, what's the path for you going forward? Reconciliation can be possible, but not in every case. Even in the Bible, we see that. But it probably can be possible in more situations than we think if two parties are willing to put in the work, like Jacob and Esau did. Amen. Now I am very happy to introduce Luke McFatrish. Luke is one of Laurie's colleagues at the Venice Theater, where he is the Digital Development Associate. But he is also a theater teacher, an actor, a singer, and a musical director in the Sarasota area, and still a very young man with all these accomplishments. He grew up learning to sing in church in his hometown in Little Rock, Arkansas. Luke teaches young children to sing and play the piano in Lakewood Ranch every week. And I am absolutely thrilled that he is willing to sing for us this morning. Luke is going to close our service by singing the song You Say by Lauren Daigle. And thank you, Luke, so much for being with us today.
The sum of every high and every low. Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. You say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short, when I don't belong. Oh, you say I am yours, and I believe. Oh, I believe what you say to me. I believe. Everything you think of me. In you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. Oh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am held when I think I am weak. You say I am strong when I am falling short, when I don't belong. Oh, you say I am yours, and I believe. Oh, I believe what you say of me. Oh, I believe. Taking all I have and now I'm laying at your feet.